All right, let's just dive right in. Today, we are going to explore a really radical new theory. I mean, one that connects the deepest mysteries of your mind with the actual fabric of the universe itself. And trust me, it's a journey that's going to challenge pretty much everything we think we know about reality.
So let's kick things off with a wild idea, a question that totally flips the script on modern neuroscience. You know, the standard view, right? It's that your brain, this, 3-pound lump of goo in your skull, somehow magically creates your entire inner world. Your feelings, your thoughts, everything. But what if that's completely backward? What if consciousness is already out there, everywhere, and your brain is just a highly sophisticated antenna tuning it in?
Now, this isn't just some late-night philosophical question. The whole idea of the brain as a receiver actually comes from trying to explain some really profound mysteries, puzzles that current science just can't seem to solve. Think of them as cracks in our nice and tidy picture of reality.
And these puzzles, they all seem to point in this same strange direction. You've got the hard problem, which basically asks, why does it feel like anything to be alive? Then you have things like terminal lucidity and near-death experiences, which are just baffling. They often happen when the brain should be shutting down or not working at all, yet people report these incredibly vivid experiences. And hey, even on a cosmic scale, we've got these giant invisible placeholders, dark matter and energy, that make up most of the universe. These aren't just little gaps in our knowledge. They hint that our whole model might be missing something huge.
So, if our current model is broken, where do we even start looking for answers? Well, the first piece of our new puzzle comes from biology and a pretty controversial idea about an invisible memory that shapes, well, everything.
This guy right here is biologist Rupert Sheldrake, and he looked at all the repeating patterns in nature. You know, the way a snowflake forms, the instincts of a spider, how crystals grow, and he asked a really out-there question. What if nature itself has a memory?
Sheldrake called his idea morphic fields. The best way to think about them is like invisible blueprints, or maybe even habits. They aren't made of matter or energy like we normally think of them. Nope, they are fields of information that guide how things form and how they behave.
And here's the really mind-bending part, morphic resonance. The idea is that once something happens in nature, a kind of habit is formed, which makes it easier for that same thing to happen again anywhere else. So in this view, the so-called laws of nature aren't these fixed eternal rules written in stone. They're more like cosmic habits that have just built up over billions and billions of years, stored in these invisible fields.
Okay, so we've got these invisible memory fields. But how does a system that vast and complex hold itself together? How does it stay stable? For that answer, we got to turn to the science of cybernetics.
Cybernetics is basically the science of control and communication. The classic example is the thermostat in your house. It takes an action, it turns on the heat, it gets feedback, the room gets warmer, and then it adapts, it shuts the heat off. That simple little loop creates stability. Well, some thinkers propose that this same principle applies to everything.
And this works for us too, on a human level. Our shared reality is kind of like a giant cybernetic control system. We all just agree that the floor is solid, not lava. And that shared belief, that feedback loop of shared information, drastically simplifies the infinite complexity of reality so we can actually function.
All right, so we have invisible blueprints from morphic fields and a self-regulating system from cybernetics. You could say that describes the universe's software. But what about our hardware, the brain? Is there some kind of key that could let us perceive this deeper reality? Well, a fascinating new theory suggests the answer lies in a powerful molecule our own bodies make, especially at the very end of life.
Yep, we're talking about DMT. And this isn't some foreign substance. Our bodies produce it. It's part of our own neurochemistry. And a really groundbreaking new model suggests that what happens in our minds during the process of dying, triggered by a massive flood of DMT, can tell us a whole lot about how consciousness works when we're alive.
This proposed DMT decoupling protocol describes a biological process, a cascade of events. The DMT flood kicks off a surge of these super high-frequency gamma waves, the kind associated with peak conscious states, and a burst of biophotons, which is literally a quantum-level light emission from our cells. This could be a physical explanation for things like terminal lucidity and NDEs. It suggests an orderly release, not some chaotic failure of the mind.
And here is where it gets absolutely wild. The experience isn't random. It's an act of observer shaping. By taking the brain's normal filters offline, DMT might allow your consciousness to interact directly with a raw field of pure information. This is like the observer effect from quantum physics, but on a deeply personal level.
It suggests that your thoughts, your inner monologue, your mind's eye, aren't just passive echoes. They are real quantum actions. They require energy, and they actively help shape the reality you perceive.
Okay, we've looked at cosmic memory, cosmic regulation, and a biological protocol for transitioning consciousness. These are some pretty different ideas, so how on earth could they possibly connect into one single, coherent picture? Well, they come together in a very speculative, but really fascinating unified model called the PSUMO theory. I know, it's a mouthful, but each part of that name represents one of the puzzle pieces we've just been looking at. So let's break it down.
So PSUMO basically proposes that the universe, at its most fundamental level, is a vast information-rich field, something like a quantum superfluid. Think of it like a frictionless ocean where information is stored as vibrations. In this model, Sheldrake's morphic fields are just the stable, resonant patterns in this ocean, the universe's habits. Cybernetics explains how the whole system regulates itself. And psychedelics like DMT, they act as a retuner for our brain, temporarily adjusting the antenna so we can perceive this underlying informational reality directly.
And this brings us right back to where we started. This theory completely reframes the hard problem of consciousness, because if consciousness is a fundamental property of this universal superfluid, then the brain doesn't have to perform the impossible magic trick of creating awareness out of dead matter. Its job becomes much more plausible, to act as a biological transceiver, receiving and filtering a tiny sliver of this universal consciousness into the unique experience of being you.
And that leaves us with a really profound final thought. If our minds are just receivers tuning into a universal field, then our inner world, our thoughts, our mind's eye, they aren't just isolated sparks in our skulls. They're localized expressions of the cosmos itself. So the theory really challenges us to ask, are we just minds experiencing a universe? Or are we the universe experiencing itself through our minds?